Okay, Mom and Dad were married in 1915, and he ran a ferry boat up at Tijuana, which is about 30 miles upriver from here, 30, 35 miles. And their prime business was crossing sheep and livestock. They did cross whoever came along, but on the old ferry. But it got to the point where most of the traffic was wanting to go through here. So somewhere around about 1920, they moved down here with the ferry boat. And he floated it down the river. I don't know how he ever done it, but he did it. He floated it down the river and set it up here. And then they lived in a tent until that winter. And in that winter, he took a bobsled. You know what a bobsled is?
Yeah.
And went up on the ice up the river. And this cabin was setting up at Tijuana Bottoms. That's the cabin they lived in up there.
This part?
All this whole cabin.
The whole thing.
The whole thing. And he numbered the logs, both 1, 2, 3, 4, however, up and down, and then east, west, north, and south. Tore it down, put it on a bobsled, and hauled it down here. I don't know how many trips he had to make, but several.
And your mom helped him with that?
Yeah, she helped. And that's before I came along. Mm-hmm. Then they rebuilt the cabin here and chinked it and daubed it. And you can still see that daubing and chinking is in there. It was a real tight cabin, very warm, and cool in the summertime. It has a dirt roof, and that's where they lived. And that's where they were living when I was born in 1925. I was born in Roosevelt, but then shortly after that, why, I moved down here, and then about, I guess probably somewhere around 1930, I was 4 or 5 years old. He sold the ferry boat to a guy by the name of Chuck Sands, and bought a ranch up by the mouth of Willow Creek, downriver from O'Ray. And that's where we were living when he was drowned in 1937.
I want to hear the story of his drowning, but would you talk a little bit about how the ferry operated here and why it was here?
There was quite a population on Hill Creek, which is just over the top there, and Willow Creek. And in order to go somewhere to shop, they preferred going this way. And they shopped either in Wellington or Mighton. And so that traffic would come through here. Also, in the spring and in the fall, the sheep herds would go through here. In fact, in the spring, they sheared right here. Right over on that hillside over there. In fact, you may have a picture of that. And they sheared the sheep, and then they crossed them took them to the summer range up on the mountain. And then in the fall, they'd come back down and cross and go out here on the desert to winter. And he charged a cent a head for those sheep to come across on the ferry. And he could put about 20 to 25 head of sheep on that ferry. And that was one of their main sources of income. But Mother told me one time, she said, you know, we made good money. We made a lot of money in there, but we didn't economize it all. We bought everything out of the store. If we'd had a milk cow, we could have done much better, but we bought canned milk and so on and so forth. It changed when we went to the ranch, because then we ran cattle, and then we had milk cows and everything up there. But that was a prime source of income, was the sheep and the livestock. They crossed cattle across here too. Okay, then they would, most generally they would take the wool from here to Wellington and put it on the railroad and take it to market. And wool at that time was worth quite a bit of money. That's before we got nylon and all that stuff. So they made a lot of clothing out of the wool and insulations and things. So it was worth quite a bit. You can't even give it away now.
The sheep would winter over on this side?
No, they'd winter out here on the desert.
Okay.
that where we came, Perry Eton in that country.
Yeah.
And then they'd summer on the mountain, up where it's cooler.
On the east Tavaputs.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And of course they ran cattle up there too, but they did run quite a bit of sheep. But they had what they called a windlass. You know what a windlass is? A hand winch.
Explain it.
Okay, it's a winch that you turn by hand that had a cable on it. And up across the river you had the big main cable with a pulley on it. And from that pulley there was two smaller cables come down to each end of the boat. One of them came to the windlass and the other just was anchored solid. So if they wanted to go across that way, they would turn the front of the boat upstream and push it off with poles, and the current would hit it and it would take it across like that till they landed over there. When they landed over there, then they'd secure it and let the apron down, and then they could drive off from it or walk off or whatever. Mostly sheepmen and ranchers. Yeah, they were his prime business. There was another element that kind of figured in also. Tijuana Bottoms was Indian ground. It was an Indian allotment. In order to get to Dad's ferry, they had to go across Tijuana. And Chief Red Moon wanted to charge him for that. And him and Dad got in a big fight over it, and he shot at Dad, and Dad took him down, and that's a whole another story. But anyway, I think there was some contention there about these sheep trailing across Tijuana Bottoms spring and fall. That probably had something to do with it also. Well, Red Moon lived in Red Moon was a sub-chief of the Utes. And he roamed this area in here a lot. In fact, he was always trying to get beef from Nutter, from these ranchers. He was kind of a mean Indian. In fact, he whipped Nutter with his quirt one day real bad. And then, as time went by, he got older, and he had him a little cabin down there, just at the lower end of Tijuana Bottom. And he lived in it. And Dad lived in this cabin up in the bend. Well, one time, he was always trying to charge. He knew what Dad charged, sent ahead for the sheep to go across the ferry. So he was always trying to charge the sheepmen a cent ahead for the sheep going across his ground. Well, one time, a guy by the name of Peterson paid him. And then everybody heard about it. And Peterson knew he'd made a mistake. But anyway, that spring when they came back to go across, he came over to get his money. And they said, well, Peterson will pay you when he comes along. Well, Peterson's outfit come, and they told him the same thing. Pretty quick, the sheep were all gone across the river, and he got mad. He had a little old Indian pony that wasn't very big, and he was pretty big Indian then. He come charging down there to Dad, had a little .32 revolver, and he says, I'm one mad Indian. Dad said, what's the matter? He says, Peterson, all the time, Peterson. Damn no Peterson, he no pay. He started shooting at Dad's feet with that pistol. And Dad didn't know what to do, so he jumped and grabbed him and jerked him and horse and all come down. And then he got on top of him and got the pistol, screwed it on the end of his nose. I think I'll just send you to the happy hunting ground. And the old Indian was pretty scared. So finally Dad turned him loose. They were having a bear dance at Ouray. That's always in May. And he got on his pony and headed for Ouray, and Dad got on his horse, went across on the ferry and went up the other side and got there before he did. Called the tribal council, told them what had happened. Pretty quick, Red Moon come, and he was upset. And they heard his side of the story. They ruled against him. You don't have any right to charge. If the tribe wants to charge, we'll charge, not you. And so, anyway, they said, you owe this man an apology. You shake hands with Hank Stewart. Apologize. He wouldn't do it. And they finally convinced him he better. And so he turned his back. He held out his hand like that. He wouldn't look at Dad. He went back to his cabin and packed his stuff and left. I think he went to Montana. I believe that's where he died, but I don't know. Rats.
And that means?
Buckskin shirt.
And why?
He always used to wear a buckskin shirt all the time when he was cowboying over in here. And he could speak Ute just as fluent as any of them. And in fact, he could speak the sign language. There used to be a squaw there at O'Ray that was deaf and dumb, but she spoke sign language. And Dad and her sit there and talk, laugh, and just have a good time.
So he got along pretty well with
He got along, oh yeah. The Utes all liked him. I have one really memory, and I don't know where it's at. Seems like it was on that side of the cabin, but I had a little red wagon, and Mother put some fruit jars in it and asked me to take it to the potato pit. You know what a potato pit is?
No.
That's, you dig down in the ground and then put logs over the top and cover it with dirt, and then you just leave a hole like that goes down in it, and that's where you store all your stuff. Canned goods and potatoes and anything that's perishable, because it's always cool down in there. So I'm pulling this little red wagon backwards. That's why I told you to watch out for the rock. I'm pulling it backwards and fell over backwards down that potato pit hole. And hit my teeth on the bottom rung of the ladder and knocked both these teeth loose. And Mother heard me scream, and she come running and jumped down in there and stepped on my thumb and peeled the thumbnail off. I can remember her washing me and the blood was just running. This was hurting way more than my teeth were. But she fell in there and found those teeth up against the roof of my mouth, brought them out and pushed them up in, and they worked. So I remember that distinctly. And then I remember another time they were crossing some bulls. I think they were McPherson's bulls. And that's when they had the old range, we called them range bulls. That were the old Herefords. They didn't droop their horns or nothing. They were mean suckers. And those old bulls wouldn't get on that ferry boat, and they had to rope them and drag them on there in the process. And Mother and I climbed up one of the trees so we could watch it. In fact, she's got some pictures, that old album I got. But anyway, yeah. Anyway, one of those bulls jumped over the rail of that ferry boat, went into the river and went down, drowned. Another one broke down the other rail and he swam out. They had a heck of a time that day, but I can remember that. But that's about all I can remember what happened here. Now remember, we moved everything in a wagon up to the ranch. It took us, I don't know how many days from here, 2 or 3 days, team and wagon. Pulled into the yard at the ranch, and I started bawling my head off. And they said, "What's the matter with you?" And I said, "I don't want to live here. I want to go back home. I don't want to live at this place." I don't know why. Kids are like that, I guess, huh?
Some of those kids.
Well, Vern was a cowboy, and he did, he'd work for this guy and that guy and another guy. Chuck was a little more stable. He had a wife and a couple of kids, and he kind of just more or less lived off the land, and he could pick up $1 here, $1 there, or he'd run the ferry boats for Dad if they had to go to town or something like that. They had a Model T Ford. They went to Brighton with. And there was a guy by the name of Bill Griffith. He had a big heavy mustache. And he was here quite a little bit, but he worked mostly in 9 Mile on the different ranches. And Walt Sands was Chuck's brother. He was kind of a vagabond. He'd come and go, and he'd disappear for a year or two, and then he'd show up. he finally got killed on the railroad trying to catch a freight train, and it missed his grab and fell underneath and got cut in two. And there was quite a few of them running around those days.
What about Ray Thompson?
Ray Thompson was more stable than most of them. He made most of his. Well, I think he probably had some kind of a pension, a little pension coming from the Army, World War One. And but he did a lot of wild horse chasing and gathering, and he lived right on up the river here, on this side of the river, in the river bottom. And Frank Hyde lived across the river. He made moonshine whiskey. John Dowling lived above him, and he was in and out quite a little bit. I think he killed a guy one time, and he was kind of dodging the law.
You told me a story once about Frank Hyde and John Dowling.
Well, Frank made this moonshine whiskey, and I never did. I was just a kid, but Willow Stevens and some of them told me, anytime you went to Frank's, you had to have a drink or two with him. And then after you had a few drinks, you had to fight him. He was built like a bull, you know. And him and old John got to drinking. They decided they'd have a shootout. Oh, each one of them got behind a log, started plunking away at each other with, old Frank had a 44. And he was a good shot with that thing. Anyway, old John stuck his head up, and Frank just parted his hair with that thing. He come down here to the ferry. He was still about half goofy, and his hair was burnt right off. Right, what happened to you? Oh, that damn Frank Hyde shot me. So he never come any closer. But he was an ugly man. He had snaggle teeth.
Frank or John?
No, John. And he was always going to dig somebody's eyes out with a stick. He was mean. He'd just go along mumbling to himself, you know. And he smoked Bull Durham cigarettes. He'd get the extra giveaway papers. He'd roll those cigarettes about the size of a match. And the econ-wise, I guess. And smoke those dang things. He had what we call a Bull Durham hack, coughing all the time.
What about Ben Morris?
Ben came along a little bit later. He came into this country down in here after Josie run him off from the ranch up there in Cub Creek. She pulled the old 32-20 on him and said, Ben Morris, you lazy SOB, I'll give you 15 minutes to get off this place. And he told Dad, he says, I give her 10 minutes back. But he moved in King Bottom. And he was just living in a tent, chasing wild horses. And he had a pinto stallion. And he'd get these wild mares and get them all bred up with this pinto stallion. And that's where those pinto horses come from. It's out in there now. That's still part of his strain. But that's about the only way he made any kind of a living. He lived in there for quite a while, and then went out and married a gal by the name of Maud Kurtz. She was about as tough as he was. And they lived down here for a little while, and then he gathered up everything and moved over to Skull Creek, Colorado. Lived in a cave in a tent over there, and that's where he died. But he was a specimen of a hard life. He came from Oklahoma, came in here and went to work for the two-bar outfit up in Powder Wash. And during the course of his life, he got one leg broke on a bad mule. He got drunk and tried to ride this mule, and he bucked him off and kicked him and broke his leg. Another time, he roped a wild horse, broke his rope. The rope come back and hit him in the eye. So he had a blue eye and a brown eye. Another time, he was coming off a trail down into here, and there was some rocks in the trail, so he got down there to get the rock out of the trail, reached under there, and a rattlesnake bit him. So he cut that and sucked the poison out, and then shot his pack horse, and laid there with his hand up in that horse's entrails all night. But that finger was like that from then on. And then he had a hole in his chest that he showed it to me when I was a kid. I could put my fist right in it, where he'd been shot by a Basco sheep herder. Him and his sheep herder had a shootout at the Rock House on Hill Creek. He shot the sheep herder in the leg, and the sheep herder shot him right in the gizzard. And when Vion Taylor, that's Jick Taylor's wife, come along, found him, both of them laying there bleeding. She gathered him up, took him to Vernal, and got him in the hospital, and got him patched up. He went to court. They found him guilty, and he did 5 years in the state pen for that. Other than that, he turned out pretty good. Mother was an angel. She put up with so much. She even put up with me. And I was an only child, and I was not spoiled much. But she could cook a meal. She was famous for being able to put a meal together and cook it faster than anybody else in the country, and good food. So she was really notarized for her cooking. She did all of her laundry on washboard with lye, homemade soap, and bluing. You know what bluing is? Bluing, that's what you put in the water to make the white clothes whiter. They don't use it anymore. And she economized the water because water was short, especially up on Willow Creek. We had to haul our water from the river to the ranch, about a mile and a half.
Up at Willow Creek or here?
Down at Willow Creek. We had plenty of water right here. Yeah. Well, we bring it up in barrels. We had a good farm. We put up alfalfa hay.
And this was about what year? 1930?
Yeah, about in the early 30s. And of course, depression was coming, or was here. So we raised everything. We had pigs, we had chickens, and we had quite a few cows, a good bunch of cows, and a good hay field. Raised our own hay, put the hay up, and then fed the livestock in the wintertime. And just had a good ranching operation. Had some real good horses, and they were good river horses. There's a difference between a river horse and a regular horse.
Which is?
A good river horse knows how to swim. They're not afraid of the river, and you can go anywhere on them. You take a horse that's not used to the river, you can't even get him into that river. I had a little smoky-colored mare she was the best swimmer I ever seen. You could get up in the saddle. She swam so high out of the water, you could stay dry on top of her. Most horses just have their head out. But a good river horse they were worth their weight in gold on this river. My job was to ride the river the river would flood every year, and it would cause sandbars, quicksand, and then when it went down, the cows would go out to get a drink. Sometimes they'd bog down. So it was my job to leave the ranch every morning, just after daylight, and ride 7 miles of the river to make sure that there was nothing in the bog. If there was something in the bog, then I'd run my horse as fast as I could back to the ranch, get Dad and the team and the double tree and the chain, and we go down and dig around that old girl's legs, put the chain on her neck, and take the team and drag her out. And we saved a lot of cows that way. We lost some though too, because if they'd get in there, even if it was warm like it is now, that water, they'd chill. They'd get really cold, and some of them would die. I run a throw line. That's a trout line to most people. Mm-hmm. Had 2 of those, and I'd check those each day for fish. And that was one of our main meals during the summer, was catfish. I caught a lot of catfish that way.
You were how old at this time when you were running the
I was line? 10, 11. Mm-hmm. before my dad was drowned. Well, he leased the Tijuana bottoms from the Indian Department on a yearly basis. We did that all the time when we got the ranch, because he was, he got along really good with the Indians. So he leased that, and we run our cattle down there. But one year, he planted some corn. We planted a big garden. Well, he bought an old one-lunger John Deere pump. And that thing, boy, that would pump water. And we raised a huge garden and a lot of corn. So the next year, he decided he'd put that whole bottom in corn. He had a guy by the name of Tom McKenna that was working for him. And so Harry Allman across the river had this 4-horse corn planter, and they needed it to get the corn in. So they got the old rowboat and they rowed across, high water time. It's in May. Mm-hmm. And they rowed across the river and loaded that corn planter in the boat. And it was really more than they should have put in there, I guess. But anyway, on the way back, Tom was rowing, Dad was standing up in the back. And they hit a whirlpool and it took the boat down, and Dad fell in, and so did Tom. The boat caught air, and the bow of it was sticking up. Tom grabbed a hold of that, and Dad come up, and he was unconscious. It had knocked him out. But Tom grabbed him, and then the weight of the two of them sunk the boat. And Harry Allmiller rode out as far as he could with his horse, threw his lariat, and Tom grabbed for it and missed it, went under, and that's the last they saw of him for 7 days. Mother jumped on her horse, was going to go out and help, and Chuck Sands grabbed the horse and wouldn't let her go, or I'd have probably lost both my parents. But that's the way he was drowned. And Tom left a wife and a teeny baby and a 2-year-old son. So it was a tragic deal. No insurance. We had insurance.
Really?
But the insurance didn't pay for drownings.
Really?
Well, I don't know if it was really or not, but that's what they said. We never got a cent. So, and I was 12 years old that year. That was in 1937, May 23rd. We used to chase wild horses all the time. That was part of our living.
Yeah.
We lived off the land quite a bit. We trapped coyotes and bobcats and lions and chased wild horses.
What would you do with the wild horses when you got them?
If it was a good horse, and sometimes you can get some really good horses out of some of this area, if it was a good horse, we'd break it out, if we could. Now, if it's an old stud or something like that, there's no way you're going to break him. But if he was a good horse, why, we'd break him out. If they weren't very good, we'd either turn them loose, or we did sell some of them for fox feed. There was a fox farm up at Vernon used to buy them from us. But it helped supplement our income. And you can get 50 cents out of the hide. They hooked a big old white fish, and it was right up in there. They call them squawfish now. We call them whitefish. And they couldn't get that son of a gun to come in, and so old Dick Taylor said, "Give me that line," and he took a dally on his saddle horn and drug that thing out with his horse.
How big was it?
Oh, it was about that high.
Wow.
So was the whitefish pretty good eating?
Oh, they're wonderful eating, yeah.
But not the suckers and the chubs?
Oh, no, they're too bony.
Yeah.
The chubs, the humpback suckers, and the round tails were all just, they weren't good. Catfish were good eating. And the squawfish, or what we call whitefish, they were the delicacy. They were good, real good. They were a little bony, but not bad.
So how did your mom fix those?
Fried them, yeah. Fried them. And we even ate the roe.
The what?
The roe.
What's that?
Eggs.
Oh, the eggs.
Fish eggs.
Really?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Caviar on
Yes.
the
Yeah, right.
Green River caviar.
Yeah, right.
Oh, those Russian sturgeon, they don't have anything on the Green River.
Yeah. This is a true story. I researched it for the Outlaw Festival, or the Outlaw Pageant in Vernal one year. They wanted me to write a poem about it. And so I did, and I got all this information, put it together, and then I wrote the poem, and they used it in their pageant. And it's telling about a guy by the name of Flat-Nosed George, who was George Curry, and he was an outlaw out of Wyoming that moved down here, got in cahoots with Butch Cassidy and that bunch, and that's when they pulled off this robbery. And then he went down here and buried his gold. So the poem goes like this. Somewhere in wild desolation, where the mighty Green River flows, there lies a hidden treasure, just where nobody knows. It was put there by an outlaw after he robbed a train, but he got killed in a gunfight and never returned again. His name was Flat-Nosed George, and he came from a hole in the wall. He robbed the Union Pacific and made a great big haul. Then he went up Rattlesnake Canyon, the roughest place around, and there he set up his hideout and buried his gold in the ground. Well, he waited there for a season till things cooled down a bit. Then he came out to rustle from the Webster cattle outfit. He was spotted one day near Thompson by one of the Webster ranch hands as he roped and tied one of their cows and was busy changing the brand. Well, that cowboy got really excited and headed for the law, and Sheriff Priest of Vernal was the first one that he saw. Well, the sheriff went into action in not too long a time. He jumped that wily outlaw as he finished up his crime, and they had a running gunfight with the sheriff right on his hocks. But the outlaw made Green River and holed up in some rocks. Well, Sheriff Tyler out of Moab was in Green River town, and when he heard about the ruckus, swore he'd cut that outlaw down. So he headed up the river, saw the outlaw right ahead, and after taking careful aim, filled him full of lead. Well, there was a $3,000 bounty on that outlaw's head, and each one of those sheriffs claimed it was him who had shot him dead. But Tyler finally won the match and collected the ransom gold. That led to his untimely death. That's another story to be told. Well, Flat-Nosed George is buried, and his secret went with him. A long, long time has passed since then, and that outlaw trail grows dim. But somewhere in wild desolation, where the mighty Green River flows, there lies a hidden treasure, the outlaw's buried gold. Did you get the old crazy Indian on there?
Did we get that?
No, we didn't. Tell the story of Nippakut.
Nippakut was a Ute, and he was pretty unbalanced. He was wild. He was a wild Indian. He lived by himself. And he frequented this area down here a lot. He would go up by Fort Duchesne occasionally, up in that area, but he spent a lot of time down here. And Mother said that she would see him out in the brush from the cabin. And whenever she saw him, she'd take food out, a loaf of bread or meat or something, whatever she had. But he'd never come and get it. She'd just take it out and set it on a rock or something and go back to the house, and pretty quick he'd come out and grab it and go. Eventually he died up here under a ledge. My uncle found him the next spring.
What was your uncle's name?
Oswaldle. Os found him, and he had starved to death under this ledge, or froze to death. He ate his fingers off as he was starving, and that was the end of him. And I don't even remember him. I don't ever remember seeing him because I was too young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's got another name.
Now that,
Crazy.
okay, Nippakut in Ute is crazy.
Okay.
So if I call you Nippakut, you're crazy.
Okay, honey.
Yeah.
You got it now.
I added another name
Yeah.
to my list.
Yeah.
So did you ever see him or meet him or?
I don't ever remember him.
Okay.
No.
He died before you were born.
Probably
Okay, so you
did,
just
yeah.
heard the
I don't
story.
remember him.